Hello Year 8 and welcome to your history lesson for this week. We are continuing our look at World War One, and in today's lesson we're looking at something which is called the Schlieffen Plan. And the Schlieffen Plan was a German plan which was designed in order to defeat France and Russia and to keep whatever war it was when it happened as quick as possible while still ensuring that Germany won. Now, spoilers I'm afraid, the Schlieffen Plan did fail. It failed fairly spectacularly, and the aim of today's lesson is for us to look at why that happened. Now, before we do that, what I'd like us to do is have a really quick recap of the short-term causes of World War One, because this is quite a tricky topic, which you need to be really secure on in order to understand how the Schlieffen Plan fit in. So, we go all the way back to the beginning of this unit on World War One. Remember that we have those two blocks of power. You've got France, the United Kingdom and Russia forming one alliance, the Triple Entente, and then you have Germany, Austria-Hungary and later Italy forming another alliance, the Triple Alliance, funnily enough. Germany was keen to expand its power. It had imperialist aims, and so in order to do that it believed in militarism, it believed in building its military, as did many other countries in Europe at the time. Our MAIN, militarism, alliances, imperialism and nationalism, long-term causes. All of this conflict centred around the Balkans, that area just south of Germany, which had previously been controlled by the Ottoman Empire, but was now essentially up for grabs. But within that area, you also then have a couple of countries who are nationalist, who believe that they have the right to rule themselves and that they should rule themselves. So this is where we now get into our short-term causes that we discussed last lesson. It all kicks off with the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Franz Ferdinand, not Frank Ferdinand, Franz Ferdinand, being assassinated by a Serbian who was living in Bosnia. Now, there is no indication that there was a connection between that man and the Serbian government, but Austria-Hungary still chose to issue an ultimatum to Serbia and to blame Serbia for that attack and that assassination. Germany encourages Austria-Hungary and says that they'll offer them any support that they need. France and Russia warn Austria-Hungary and say that if they go to war with Serbia, there will be consequences. Serbia did not want to go to war. It accepts all but one of the terms of the ultimatum. Remember that the term it didn't accept was really, really very, very small. Austria-Hungary declared war anyway. That then brought these two sides into motion. Russia began mobilising its army. Germany then declared war on Russia, and Germany marched through Belgium in order to attack France. And because Germany invaded Belgium in order to attack France, Britain declared war on Germany, and we have all of these major powers now directly at war with each other, except for Italy, which we're not going to discuss a huge amount. That then leads us into the Schlieffen Plan. Now, the Schlieffen Plan had existed well before 1914. It was created by a German general called General von Schlieffen, funnily enough. And it was designed to be the plan that would take place if there was war with Russia and France. Because if you remember from that first lesson, tension between these countries had been building up for years. In fact, this tension had started in the 19th century, before the 20th century had even started. And so this plan was put in place. Now, we're going to look at two things. First thing we're going to look at is what the plan was. And then we're going to look at what actually happened. And once we compare the two of these, we're going to look at why the Schlieffen Plan failed. So, you need the sheet. If you can't print it out, and having it on a screen is absolutely fine. In terms of annotating the diagram, just do a really, really rough copy. Don't worry too much about everything perfectly right, just make it clear which the different countries are. You need something to help you track the reading. You're also going to need a pencil because you're going to be drawing on these diagrams, or you're going to be making your own. Okay, so in fact let's start with our keywords. So to mobilize is to prepare the army of a country for war. If someone is neutral, it is when a person or government does not take sides in a conflict. A fortification is a wall or building which is used to strengthen somewhere against attack. So a castle is an example of a fortification. To outflank is to move around the side of an enemy in order to attack them. So if you had an army, that's a line of soldiers there, then to outflank them, if you were the enemy, would be to try and move around and attack them from a different angle or from the side, so that they would be caught unaware, they would be unaware that that's where they were going to be attacked from, and you'd be more likely to win. And a stalemate is a situation in battle in which neither side can win. It is not victory, it's not loss, it simply means that it's just so evenly matched that no one can win. Okay, the Schlieffen Plan. The German army assumed that Russia would take at least 6 weeks to mobilise its army. This meant that Germany would have time to launch a crushing attack on France before focusing on Russia. In order to reach France, the German army would travel through neutral Belgium. This would give the Germans the element of surprise. It would also allow the German army to avoid French fortifications on the border between France and Germany. Germany would not need to worry about Britain getting involved because France would have been defeated before Britain had time to respond. After France had been defeated, the German army would be transported by train to Russia, there's my first error, where they would defeat the Russian army. Okay, so that's the plan. What I want you to do now is I want you to turn this bit of text into annotations on this map, and you can see I have labelled all of the really important countries for you. You'll notice that I've numbered the steps. So this is the United Kingdom, it's not France. I'm just labelling that step as France and then Russia. So to give you an example so that you know what you're doing, and I'm just going to have a look at my teacher copy to make sure that I'm doing it right. Okay. So, this first step here, the German army assumed that Russia would take at least 6 weeks to mobilise its army. Okay, well, Russia, I'm going to have to put an arrow because Russia is actually up here. That's the second change I'm going to make before I put this out. So, Russia is here. And I'm going to put a little clock there with a 6 and some stick men to represent the army. Okay, so 6 weeks to mobilise the Russian army, and as a result of that, Germany would have time to launch a crushing attack on France before focusing on Russia. Now, it would be really, really tempting for me to just draw an arrow from France to Germany, but we know that Germany did not just march straight through this border here. On this border, France had a lot of fortifications. Now, I'm going to draw like a little castle here, but this is the 20th century, so it's less likely to be castles, more likely to be forts or guns or places where there would be a lot of troops. So Germany doesn't want to march through here. That's where France would be expecting them to march. It's also where France has a lot of fortifications. So the plan was that instead Germany would march through France. So that's the first stage, our first box. What I then want you to do, using this reading, I want you to fill in this second box. So Germany expected that Russia would take at least 6 weeks, marched through Belgium in order to avoid French fortifications and invade France. I want you to pause the video now and fill in the diagram to show what the next step would be. Okay. I'm just going to zoom in so that you can see my teacher copy. So let's flip over onto that side. So this is the diagram that we drew together, and for some strange reason on my copy the arrow is there, so I'll replace that on yours. And then in my second box, so we have France being defeated. We don't need to worry about Britain, because Britain's just not going to be involved in this plan, they won't have time. And then German soldiers would be transported by trains to Russia. Let's correct that now. To Russia by train, and then they would be defeated. So that was the original plan. And as the question for this lesson tells us, that is not what happened. So I'm going to ask you to do the exact same thing again. We're going to go through the reading, and then once we've gone through the reading, you're going to draw 4 diagrams this time that follow the exact same pattern. So let's read along with me. What actually happened? Germany launched the Schlieffen Plan on the 2nd of August 1914 and sent the German army into Belgium towards France. The Belgian army put up strong resistance. It didn't stop the German army's advance into France, but it significantly slowed it down. Germany eventually entered France on the 20th of August. Roughly 120,000 British troops had landed in France almost 2 weeks beforehand. So it took 28 days for Germany to march through France. That is roughly, in fact, that is exactly 4 weeks. And within 2 weeks of that time, British troops had already landed in France. Unfortunately for Germany, the Russian army was also a much bigger threat than initially thought. Russia began mobilising its troops as early as the 29th of July and managed to mobilise much more quickly than expected. On the 17th of August 1914, while the German army was fighting in Belgium, Russia began its invasion of Germany. The German army was forced to split in order to defend its eastern border. Once it reached France, the German army initially made good progress. They were only 48 kilometres from Paris in the beginning of September. However, they were also exhausted and fewer in number than in August, because they'd been forced to split and also they'd experienced casualties. After the Battle of the Marne, the German army was forced to retreat to the River Aisne. This is in France. When they reached the river, they dug trenches to defend themselves. So basically a long hole in the ground. What followed was a tactic which would shape warfare on the Western Front for the next 4 years. The two sides attempted to outflank each other, which we've got at the top, moving around the side of enemy trenches. With each attempt to outflank the enemy, the armies were forced to dig trenches to defend themselves and stop horrific losses. Over time, a line of trenches began to creep outwards, eventually stretching from the Belgian coast to the mountains of Switzerland and locking the sides in a stalemate. Now, obviously there are a lot of countries, there are a lot of dates involved in this, so we're going to take this one step at a time, just so that you're aware. That country just there is Switzerland, so if you need the names of the countries, go back to this first map where I've labelled them. And what I then want you to do is just take each one of these diagrams one step at a time, because there's a lot of dates here. If you tried to do it all at once, it would be really confusing. And you'll see for each one, I've given you a heading, and that's what I want that diagram to focus on. So your first diagram is going to be what actually happened with Belgium. Second diagram is going to be about Russia. Your third diagram is going to be the Battle of the Marne. And the Battle of the Marne, just to give you a bit of context, happened about there. And then the beginning of trench warfare. So pause the video now and draw each one of your diagrams. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, just really quickly, you'll have to bear with me, I'm going to draw a box. over each one of my diagrams so that I can reveal and talk about them one by one. So bear with me for 1 second. Dear me, it's not doing very well, is it? There we go. Right, sorry about that, you're right. Right, so let's switch on to the right-hand monitor. Okay, so this is my first diagram which shows Belgium. And the first thing that you're going to note is that I've got my little clock just there, which is designed to show that even though Germany did march through Belgium, it took a lot longer than they expected. And because it took longer than they expected, that gave Britain enough time to send troops into France. I've also put that little army to the side there. I'm not worrying too much about that yet. That's to do with Russia. If you haven't put that in, don't worry about it. The really key points is this idea of the arrows still going through Belgium, but having a little clock to show that it's taking a fair amount of time, and that arrow coming from Britain to show that we've got 120,000 troops being sent from Britain to France. If you want to label it as 120,000, you can. If you want to put dates on them, you can, but you don't have to. Okay, so our next step is looking at Russia. It says Belgium, but it's going to say Russia. And that's when we start seeing this army that's mobilised really quickly coming into play. So we don't need the clock on it anymore because we're not worried about time. But now we've got that Russian invasion of Germany and the split of the German army. Now, you may notice, it's not massively clear on my diagram, but I've made those two arrows slightly smaller to demonstrate the fact that because the German army had to split, it meant that both of the armies it created were smaller, because they were, well, not necessarily halved, but they had to be split. Okay, next up then is the Battle of the Marne. So, German army managed to progress fairly far into France. They got within 48 kilometres of Paris, but then they were forced to retreat. And when they were forced to retreat, they dug in. They dug these trenches, which is why I've got our little spade. That then led to the formation of trench warfare and this idea of outflanking. So this dotted line that I've put all the way down, which is kind of roughly the border between France, Germany and Belgium, but also mine is geographically accurate, but obviously there was no way for you to know this. It mainly goes through France, kind of skirts around Belgium, and then hits along the German and French borders, and then it hits the edge of Switzerland, because you've got the Swiss Alps that are in the way, these mountains that are in the way. And then these arrows are designed to show that outflanking, those armies trying to get around the side of each other, and then the other army digging in. And this line is then called the Western Front. That line of trenches running from the coast of Belgium to the Swiss Alps. Okay, so check all four of those diagrams against mine. Make any corrections that you need to make. And it is really important that you have an accurate collection of diagrams, because it's going to make it much easier for you to explain what happened and why it happened. And that's our next stage. So there was a plan. The plan sounded great for Germany, but it didn't go to plan at all. And we need to think about why it didn't go to plan. Now, when you do this, I don't want you to just think about single events. Oh, well, this took longer, or this didn't take as long. Think about why Germany thought that things would happen the way they thought they would with the Schlieffen Plan, and what that shows us about Germany's attitude towards other countries. So I want you to pause the video, and then around the spider diagram, I want you to write down any reasons that you can think of as to why the Schlieffen Plan ultimately failed. Okay, so we're going to have a look at a few on my teacher copy. There are three big reasons here. First of all, Germany didn't expect the Russian army to mobilise quickly. They thought that they would have at least 6 weeks. Even if you were to factor in the fact that it took a month for the German army to march through Belgium, then in theory they might still have enough time to catch the Russian army by surprise. But in reality, Russian army mobilised in days rather than weeks. Next reason, Germany didn't expect Belgium to delay the German troops. That seriously affected their ability to fight Russia. It meant that they had to split their army in half. It also gave Britain enough time to send 120,000 troops into France. It also meant that France knew that the German army were coming and that there wasn't the element of surprise, and they had time to prepare. And that links into my final point. Germany didn't expect the British to be able to respond to their invasion, so actually those two are kind of linked, aren't they? They didn't expect Britain to respond, they didn't expect Belgium to delay, they didn't expect the Russian army to mobilise quickly. And before I asked you to do this, I said, well, think really carefully about what this shows about Germany's attitude to other countries. And it all comes down to those main reasons that we talked about when we talked about the long-term causes of World War I. A lot of this comes down to nationalism on the part of Germany, the belief that Germany was better than other countries. And German leaders believing that they were better than other countries also led to them thinking that other countries weren't as good as them, and led to them underestimating other countries. So this nationalism means that Germany were really overconfident about their ability to defeat the army of two major powers incredibly quickly. They also underestimated Russia. They thought that Russia would take ages to mobilise its troops, and even then it wouldn't be very strong. They underestimated Belgium. They didn't expect Belgium to resist the invasion, and they underestimated Britain, and they didn't expect Britain to be able to respond quickly. All of this means that the Schlieffen Plan just very, very quickly falls apart. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is to do the quiz that I have put on your repraise. Now, I'm going to emphasise this because I've got a couple of emails from people. The quiz is what I use to determine whether you have done the work. When you do the quiz, I know who you are. I know your exact answers. I know how long it took you to do the quiz. I'm not expecting anybody to get 100%. However, if I see people who are writing things like question marks or full stops or I don't know as the answer, that is going to affect the score that I give you when your reports go out to your parents. It is exactly the same as any normal history lesson. I am looking for evidence that you have watched this video and that you have given it an honest go. And if you are completing the quiz in under a minute and you are writing things like question marks or I don't know as the answers to those single line questions, that's not trying, and that doesn't give me any evidence that you have actually done the work or read the video, or watched the video. So bear in mind that I'm not looking for you to get everything right, but I am looking for evidence that you've given it a go. If there's anything that I can help with, just send me a message via ePraise and I'll do what I can. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.